Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to our first webinar series. In this series, our team at Lanturn, alongside experts in the industry, will be sharing why your fund or company should be set up in Singapore. We hope these webinars will give you insight into the current business climate in Singapore. And for our final webinar this afternoon, we'll be focusing on why Singapore is an ideal place to set up your company. The attendees can ask questions at any point during the webinar through typing in the Q&A chat box. We'll be addressing the questions within the conversation or at the end of the webinar. Firstly, I'm Francesca. I'm the head of sales at Lanturn. I've worked in the corporate services industry for over 6 years, and I'll be the host for this webinar series. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our 3 speakers today. Firstly, Xiaoning has more than 20 years of experience as a corporate lawyer. She is currently the founder and managing director of a boutique corporate law firm, Rubicon Law LLC. Prior to that, she was director at one of the big 4 Singapore law firms before she helped set up and head the M&A and corporate finance practice of Oon & Basel, a fast-growing practice in Singapore. Xiaoning's main area of practice is in mergers and acquisitions, domestic and cross-border, across a broad range of industries. Her area of practice also extends to capital markets, private equity, general corporate advisory, and SGX compliance work. Xiaoning has advised many companies on starting up in Singapore and also worked with many startups and growth companies in their fundraising rounds. Next, Max has over 15 years of experience in digital tech, hospitality, private equity, and MNCs, and has worked across the world and conducted business in more than 20 countries. Currently, Max is the head of Asia Pacific at TechNation. TechNation supports the UK's leading scaling digital tech companies as they expand in the region. Additionally, Max is a seasoned public speaker and has spoken at multiple events across Asia Pacific. So finally, we have Chris from Lanturn joining us. Chris is the CFO and head of fund services at Lanturn. Chris has 9 years international experience in financial audit and financial management and has worked in South Africa, the USA, UAE, and Singapore. Prior to joining Lanturn, Chris spent 3 years working at a Big 4 audit firm and was later the finance manager for a multinational reseller of petroleum products. So thanks to all of our speakers for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your insights. I wanted to start off with quite a broad question. Many of our participants are based abroad, may not have had previous experience working in Singapore. How does Singapore compare to other countries for doing business? Xiaoning, if you could perhaps start with answering that question.
Thank you, Francesca. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon to address the audience on what my experience has in terms of sharing with you how this is able to help you make your decision whether to come to Singapore or not. I think what I can share is really what I believe makes Singapore an ideal and conducive country and jurisdiction to setting up businesses. I think one thing that Singapore has positioned itself, it's a global business hub for various reasons, and I think that is a big selling point. Geographically, where it is located has given it a name to be a gateway to the region. I think being the heart of Southeast Asia, it has become very, in terms of location, it is easy access to all the other countries in the region, which is up and coming in recent years. And many companies leverage on Singapore as a base, whether to put their businesses here or even as a start to hold their holding companies while they spread their operations within the region. I think Singapore is seen to be stable. It has a stable government, and along with that, a strong economy. And with that, of course, it gives a lot of trust to investors to put their money here in Singapore. And that allows a lot of companies to have faith, to trust in the system. And having a reliable and efficient legal system also helps. We like to, Singapore prides itself as being very efficient in terms of how things work around here, the processes. In terms of even starting up companies, there are various structures available. It's flexible. And overseas businesses can see what are the options available to them and how they want to structure their businesses. You can start as a private limited company, which is the most typical structure. There are businesses you can register on its own. You can have partnerships. And there are also a new creature called the variable capital company, which is very popular among fund setup now. I won't go into details of all of these, but essentially in terms of how these companies or various entities can be set up, it can be done fairly quickly. The processes are all in place. So in terms of setting up companies, it can be done actually within 1 to 2 days if all the documents are in place. So easily within a week, a new company can be set up in Singapore. And also there are not many restrictions. You know, in Singapore, we do not have foreign shareholding restrictions. Any company setting up here, you can have one shareholder. They don't need to be Singaporean. You just need to have one local director as well. And also, I think one of the main attractions is also the tax system. We do offer very attractive tax rates, and the government has also come up with a lot of tax schemes to help new businesses that want to come and set up. There are different schemes available for different types of industries and different types of setups. And I think one of the panelists can go into more details on this. So I think generally what I like to share is really the ease of setup, the trust in the system, the stable economy. This makes Singapore attractive. And I wouldn't compare with other countries. I can only say the positives of what we have here.
Thanks so much, Xiaoning, for that insight. So yes, definitely a lot of benefits for doing business in Singapore. Max, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've got experience doing business in a lot of countries. So maybe you can talk a bit more about how Singapore compares to doing business elsewhere.
Yeah, well, first, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. And just to add on, like to what was just said, like I definitely, the trust and the efficiency is one of the key factors that we see when we're looking at Singapore. So I see that in my past as setting up an entity for a scale up from the UK, and now working with hundreds of companies that are looking at growing internationally. But it's not only about just the country, is what Singapore represents in the region. Is really a hub for Southeast Asia, if not Asia Pacific. And the reason why it's such a great place to come is because everything has been designed to support you to not only looking at this market, but be able to expand in a fast way. There is all the agreements that be done with the country of ASEAN that are really supporting on doing this. There is access to new markets that your company abroad will not necessarily imagine that it is possible. And everything is done in a way that is you can do it easily, fast, and without many risk. So there is all the operational side that is here that makes it obviously I'm a bit biased because I've been here for a very long time, but it makes it the best country in the region to establish and really have all this tool, the best locations, because you can go, but also like the less risk into this. When we see that now the population just of Southeast Asia is around 650 million people, and that's more than 70% of them are internet users, that creates a view for your companies to grow and have the right thing. I say like what we get from the government entity, like the work that's been done from the Economic Development Board, the EDB, Singapore Innovate, Enterprise Singapore. There's a lot of great things that put in place that are accessible for new companies to get support either through grants or through acceleration of programs that to enter the markets, connectivity with corporations, and access to business development deals that would not necessarily be available there. The government really puts an emphasis to bring new business and to bring new talents here. So one of the things that we can also see is that there is a lot of great university in Singapore that building more and more talents, and a lot of initiatives that have been put years ago to create more engineering talents, more talents to to support your growth of a company. But I think that's what makes a great country. So to summarize, like really operationally, it's easy and straightforward. There's a great support from the government, and you have access to one of the fastest growing and more interesting region for sales in the world right now, in my own opinion.
Thank you so much for your insight, Max and Xiaoning, on that topic. We certainly agree with you. We see a lot of interest from clients who have set up successful companies in Southeast Asia and then are looking to set up holding companies in Singapore just because of the ease of business. Xiaoning, you touched on the topic of tax briefly, and it is something I'd like to go into more detail in for our participants. Perhaps, Chris, you can give us more insight.
Yeah, thanks, Francesca, and then thanks to Xiaoning and Max for your time. Nice to have you on this webinar. Yeah, so I think looking at the tax regime in Singapore, one of the most important things would obviously be that it has a very low income tax rate. So it's much lower than your European countries, lower than majority of the countries in Southeast Asia. And there's also no capital gains tax. So that helps take a lot of pressure off if anything does go quite well for any investments that your company has made. Following on from what Xiaoning said as well, Singapore has very stable government. And what this means is that their tax regime is also very stable. Any changes that they are going to make are notified to people quite well in advance. And they also have very simple tax regulations and compliance requirements. So a lot of people coming from other countries in the world with more complicated tax authorities are really very happy to find out, oh, there's only two tax submissions that you need to do per year, sometimes only one, depending on the company. Then I think the main exemption that IRS are pushing would be the startup tax exemption. So what that means is if you do start up a company, in your first 3 years, you'll have approximately 75% of your first $200,000 of taxable profit exempted from tax. But then even after your 3 years are done, for all companies in the country, you have your partial tax exemption, which gives you 50% of your first $200,000 taxable income exempt. And then if we're looking at regional headquarters and holding companies more specifically, any dividends that are received by your holding company from your subsidiaries are tax-free. And so you don't have to worry about any double tax, or you're kind of paying tax on profits that you've already paid tax on in other countries. And finally, I think Singapore has established double tax agreements with most major economies in the world. And so when it comes to your transfer pricing and to your intercompany transactions as a holding company, you can have a bit more comfort and not be punished too much on withholding taxes or any other taxes.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that detail into tax. So there's clearly a lot of positives about doing business in Singapore, which we've discussed. However, speaking from experiences, what challenges do businesses in Singapore face? Max, if you can perhaps start with that question.
So one of the challenges that we see a lot, like for different companies, it's a little bit contradictory to my first points, but like there is a lot of work that is done in hiring and creating talent here. But like one of the challenges is to actually getting those talents in the company when you start. So there is a fierce competitions and that could be one of the challenges, finding the right person for your company, especially when you're coming from abroad and setting up your original headquarters, to finding this right persons or person in role that will be able to help you grow. So I think it's one of the challenge that we have seen. The second one is to not necessarily do as much homework as companies should do, and kind of leaving their product or their sales similar to what it was from the previous region. Very often what I see from the West, and not adapting it to the local consumers that they're looking for. So having an assumption that it has to be the same and not adapt is one of the challenge arriving with this, and having to take a few steps back to really offer the right product to grow in the market. And the second is one of the challenge. There is a lot of opportunity, but I have to say in Singapore, trust and relationship is very, very key, and it takes a little bit longer. So you have to be patient and really put the efforts to not trying to close deals too quickly, and understand that the first deal is the hardest one, and is going to take longer maybe than other places, and people are not necessarily going to tell you no or yes, but like really taking a little bit longer. So one of the challenge that people will see is that your sales cycle at the beginning will be a little bit longer and a little bit more challenging, because you don't have any traction in Asia, and people will want to see something in Asia. This is more for new corporations. So that's a few of the challenge that I see are really finding the right talents that are matching your growth and your culture from your company. Making sure that the product is valuable for the region, and lastly, the sales cycle, or a little bit more patience can be required to close the first deals and grow.
Thank you so much, Max, for that detail. That's really useful to hear, and I think a lot of our participants who may be looking to enter the market, that'll be very useful information for them. So, Xiaoning, you've also worked on advising a number of startup and growth companies. I wanted to explore with you, what are some of the legal issues companies face, and how can they prevent them?
Sure. I think just to ride on what Max started in terms of doing homework, it's the level of preparedness when companies want to start. I think this applies to any company in general, whether they are startup or already started. I think a lot of them do not necessarily consider structure, how they want to structure the company when they start. I think they need to plan ahead to think about, especially if they want to bring in investors in the future, how do they want the share capital to look like? This is quite key, especially for founders. It's good to know what kind of rights you need to have as a founder, and what kind of rights investors expect to have when they come in, and having to see whether you need to then formulate different classes of shares, who will get what shares, and how many are you willing to give up. So I think structuring is one of the key things, but of course it's a bit of a chicken and egg as well. I think it's good to have an idea of what you want and what you're willing to give up. And of course, it also depends on where you are, at which stage you are, and for the type of investors you want to bring in. Of course, investors would have a lot of their asks, and whether you are able, how much you want that investor to come in would depend on how much you are willing to give in as well. So I think structuring is one of the key things to consider when it comes to starting out. The other thing is more internal operations, and as well as external business. In terms of internal operations, you do want to put in place proper contracts within the company, especially in comes to retaining people. So key people in the company, key managers, you want to have in place proper employment contracts, service agreements with them, and having in place, the terms that would be agreeable for retention of talent. And I think I will talk a little bit later about, employment option schemes, which is part of retention. And then before I go that, it's just talking about, besides operational contracts, it's really your business contracts with external parties. You may be eager to start off the business and eager to enter into different types of contracts with your suppliers, customers. Because of time constraints, you just accept their terms. But after a while, we realize that, you're agreeing to different terms with different people. it's good to streamline and standardize as the company grows. So I think that comes considering having templates put in place, have general terms and conditions for master agreements, and you only deviate for certain types of contracts that you deal with, certain types of vendors or customers. So these are also certain considerations. And of course, because there are always costs involved, it's whether you want to get everything done properly from the start or think about it as you go along later on. I think having it done right from the start is always good. Then you don't spend time later on and spending more money later on trying to streamline. So, back on the topic of ESOP, employment share option plans, there are many different ways of structuring this. And a lot of companies may not think about it at the start, but they will start to think about it along the way. And I think this is very common nowadays for a lot of startups when they want to set up. They consider as part of their capital structure, setting aside some number of shares that will be offered to employees. So it's how this is going to be designed. It's good to think about this in terms of how much is allocated, and also considering about investors who are coming in, because they're always concerned about dilution. So these are also some of the things that needs to be planned out. How much needs to be set aside for employees and how much you think it's worthwhile for retention and reward. I won't go into too much details. I'm open to answer questions if there are any. I think these are some of the main legal issues that will be faced by companies for consideration.
Thank you so much, Xiaoning, for all that detail there. A lot of useful points to consider. I was wondering if you could go into more detail, perhaps, on the topic of raising investment and if you've come across any legal issues within this area.
As in fundraising, right?
Yes,
companies that are going for fundraising?
Yes.
I think what I can share is really from experiences from the different types of transactions I've dealt with. Not so much, because I don't do fundraising myself, and I don't really, where I can help to connect investors with companies, but I'm not so much involved in the actual commercial aspects. But a lot of, in terms of what I see, I think it also very much depends on the positioning of the companies, where they are at that point. They're looking for funding, whether it's a pre-seed round, a seed round, or Series A or B. What is always important is having a strong business case. And that's when you can really command your terms. And, you can then be in a point of strength in negotiating with investors, because investors will always ask for the sky. And very often, they have a lot of expectations. You don't want investors to come in and start dictating to founders how they want the company to be. I think founders want to be in control. And of course, there are also investors who would expect founders to be in control and to be the ones growing and increasing the value of the company. So one of the key things in fundraising is there is a likelihood that they want founders to be locked up in the company for a while. So this is always a point of negotiation, how much the founder will need to be tied in, and whether that you'll be allowed to sell down in some secondary rounds. So these are the points founders need to be concerned about and thinking through. How do you want to be able to have some flexibility in negotiating these points? The other things are, of course, veto rights. Investors would always ask for certain veto rights. And for managers of the company, you need to have some flexibility in making certain decisions in the company. So it's always balancing that, and whether you want to give up some of the control element to investors. So it's maybe putting in place certain thresholds beyond which then investors can have a say. Below that, the founders should have a free hand. And one of the other things I would touch on is preferential rights that investors want to have in terms of liquidity, because some investors, obviously, they're looking to exit at some point, and they want to have certain rights when it comes to exit. A lot of it would be being able to tag along and being able to drag along. These are very common terms that you will find in investment agreements. And whether, they get to exit first before, certain parties. So as more and more different types of investors come in, that there could be certain investors that want to rank ahead of others. So it's really managing the expectations of different investors at different points. And of course, there are always concerns about dilution, right? Investors are always concerned about that, and some would want anti-dilution rights. So again, it all depends on valuation. And I think this is some of the things that companies, founders need to be mindful of when negotiating the terms with investors. I think these are some of the pretty key items that I just want to share.
Thank you so much, Xiaoning. A lot of useful advice there. And yes, we do have many clients raising investment in Singapore, so I'm sure they'll take a lot of value from that. Max, how about you? Do you have any experience with companies raising investment here?
Yes, well, first, resonating with a lot of things that Xiaoning say, we have to be, for foreign companies coming to raise money here, like really be aware that term sheets are slightly different than what you will see in the West. And there's really like, be prepared, like, and do your homework early before going to investors here. It's one of the key things. There's a lot of great investors and a great opportunity in Singapore to raise money, but it's also a very small ecosystem, and most of the investors know each other very well, so the terms will be shared, and the valuations will be shared fairly quickly in the industry. So it's important that before to go, like to make sure that you understand that it's the ecosystem in Singapore, and people know each other. The other point that we've seen with a lot of companies raising money here and working with investors at different level, it's very key to already have a presence in Asia, in Singapore before raising money. Most of the investor will be looking more at investing of companies that already have a presence in the regions and have a commitment to the region to really see that there's an expansion here. So I think one of the things, like before raising money, is important to have a full plans for the region, and looking at investor that will be strategic partners in the regions to be able to grow and accelerate, because of the terms and the valuation that you will get is very key to have an extra incentives to raise money here and working with the partners. So that's a few things that we've seen, like supporting cooperation and my fundraising in the regions, that I will really to be able to be mindful, understand that it's a small ecosystem, understand that the term sheet difference and that is not necessarily the same points that you will have in the West, or especially in the UK, which I'm more familiar with, and in Europe. And that it's really important to be already have with a strong plan and an implementation in Asia Pacific, or at least in Southeast Asia, if you're looking at raising money here.
Thanks very much, Max, for adding those points onto Xiaoning's points. Very useful information. I'd just like to dive more into maybe your personal experience when setting up your company. So is there any one thing you would have done differently when setting up your company?
There's many things I would have done differently. No, I know what I did wrong. So I think the first thing that really, when I first set up my company in 2015 in Singapore, I keep saying do your homework, and I feel I should have done a little bit more and do some simple things and really put the right structure in place, understanding what was the future. To your point, Shannon, like you did earlier, it's never too early to think of where you're gonna go, and it's much easier to do it when you start and with the right partners. Then later we'll try to solve the problems that you created. So I think I will have spent a little bit more time on what I call the boring stuff, and really establish like this a little bit more than versus trying to go and sell as much as possible. The second things that we probably will have done better is work more with the local government. What is in place from Singapore is not necessarily easy sometimes to understand where to go and get which grant, but there's a lot of great things that are available here, and really the Singapore wants company to thrive here and to grow, and there's a lot of help that is possible. So it's worth like try to find a way to navigate through all this association, like, and I mentioned EDB earlier, but I mentioned it again. I think they can really give great support. And then there is a company like Lanturn that can help you like do works that you don't want to do, and help you support this. So really use everything that is available to have as good as a structure to start, and as much as support as possible from establishments that are already here, and probably network more. I think it's something that is applicable everywhere in the world, but also in Singapore. Like network more and network locally is very important to really understand the local markets, to understand the local people in these markets, and they will be able to expand. Is one thing if you come as an expat like me and try to go into your social network of expat, but it's not what is going to actually teach you about the region. Probably the biggest advice I would give is learn about the food and talk about food in Singapore. Like this is what connects lots of people, and this is one of the way that you will really be able to create the network and understand how it works here, and to create this ecosystem. I know it's half of a joke, but like food is very important here, and people will ask you where is your favorite chicken rice, or where is your favorite food, and that will help with your growth definitely. That's a few points that comes to mind on what I would have done differently.
Thank you so much, Max. Yeah, I definitely think everyone would agree with you on the food point. There's so many amazing choices here, especially if you're into spicy food. So thank you. Shannon, do you have anything to add on to that?
Well, I must thank Max for that, because I'm learning from him as well. I think the journey, it's really a journey, starting out your own business. And you know, my company is coming to 2 years old. So far, I can't say whether there's anything I would have done differently, because to me, I'm still learning along the way, stumbling along the way. And I haven't really encountered anything that would have changed anything from my decisions in the past. But I know that if it is something that is not right, I would learn from it and not do it this way. So I think one main thing that I would say is really taking right advice from the right people. It is good to talk to people in the right domain space who has the right domain knowledge, and you know, being flexible in your thinking. That's what I would share from my own personal journey.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for that. Yes, I think we're always on a learning journey. Perhaps for some more practical advice for our participants, Max, is there any software that you use often during your day-to-day business operations?
Yeah, but there's many. I think we especially with the past 2 years that we had doing everything remotely, we use more and more software, and I think it's key. And I have to say that it's been even more accepted into the work stream in Asia than it was from my work with the West. But I use about Xero for my accounting. we use Lanturn and the software of Lanturn. I use Miro boards. I really like that to work with different teams and online to do some brainstorming. Use what else? Well, all the Google Suites softwares that are very helpful for collaboration online. Airtable is one of the key things that I've been using to manage database and working with clients. But Slack probably for communications. That's the one that come to mind. But I like Xero because I like to understand what's happening with my numbers.
Thanks very much, Max. Yes, we use quite a few similar software. We use Xero and Slack as well internally. So thanks for those tips. Hopefully some of our participants can take some inspiration from that. So moving on to our final question before going into some of the participants' questions. It would be quite a broad one piece of advice for new business owners in Singapore. Max, perhaps could you start with that?
One piece only.
Could be a couple.
Spend as much time as you can here, and really build the connections and be patient. Is really you're gonna build some of the best connections you have personally done here. So yeah, build the right connection and be patient.
Thanks, Max. Anything to add on to that, Xiaoning?
I mean, it was really one piece of advice. I think this may sound really cliched, but it's really, getting advice from the right people, the right professionals to help you get started.
Thank you. That's good to hear. So thank you, all of the speakers, for your time today. I do have one question from the participants. I think, Chris, you might be in the best position to answer that. So the question is MLI or BEPS expected to reduce or dilute the taxation benefits / exemptions in Singapore?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Francesca. Thanks, Mahendra, for the question. Yeah, so maybe just for people who don't understand the abbreviations or MLI and BEPS, it's pretty much talking about the international tax authorities around the world have agreed that they want to start introducing certain treaties to prevent multinationals from sticking all of their profits in a zero tax location. And so one of the major things there would be the implementation of a minimum tax rate, which happened in December 2021. So that minimum tax rate is currently sitting at 15%, which is quite low, but still Singapore is lower than that. So currently for them, there's no pressure to reduce their income tax rate. The second part would look at where you are recording your profit versus where your operations actually are. And so for a lot of companies, if you are setting up your regional headquarters in Singapore, that means you'll have significant operations, you'll have employees based here. And so it makes it much easier for the group to prove that the profits that you are recognizing in Singapore can be linked to the operations, and it's not an intentional method of reducing your tax by putting profits where they shouldn't actually be recorded. So I think, yeah, I mean, and maybe just a final point. So with the OECD, who are implementing all of these procedures, for them, they've reviewed Singapore's tax regime and they're pretty happy with it. I mean, it's not the most positive wording, but they are classified as a not harmful tax regime. But what that means is that there's no pressure from the OECD for Singapore to change their tax rules anytime soon. Yeah, Mahendra, hope I answered the question. And
thank you for that detail, Chris. And again, so thank you to all of our speakers for giving your time to discuss today. We got a lot of value and insights from it. So to all the participants, there will be a post-webinar survey to fill in. So if you could complete that, that would be very much appreciated. Lastly, if you could follow us on our social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, and through our website. There will be more webinars that we will be hosting on industry topics in the coming months. So you can stay updated through our social media channels or through our website. So thanks everyone for attending.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks to the speakers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max. Thanks,
Thank you
Xiaoning.
very much.